Hello, everybody out there in LinkedIn Live land. If you're watching this live or you're watching this recording, welcome. I am Dr. Caroline Brookfield, and this is my show. I don't know if it's really a podcast or a show or what you want to call it, but I call it Creative Lifescaping. And it's a show where we interview people who may not be traditionally creative and how they use creativity to make their lives at work and home better. So I am so excited to have my next guest today. He's my first guest of 2022. And Louis Fernandez is a husband and father of 3 beautiful kids. Surely blessed, he spent 7 years as an Army officer. He deployed twice and saw fierce combat in Afghanistan. After the military, he spent some years working in a Fortune 100 company before realizing he had a knack and a passion for business. I can relate to this journey myself. In the midst of the pandemic, Louis embarked on his entrepreneurial journey, helping other businesses reduce costs to thrive in tough economic environments. True to his deliver results first nature, his company only gets paid if they save you money. It's like a no risk endeavor for the business anyway, maybe not for Louis, but he's so confident that they offer that. He's also an author of a 5-star rated leadership book called Keep On Leading and runs his own podcast called Built with Grit. Welcome, Louis. Oh, hang on. You're not ready. Welcome, Louis.
Thank you. Very excited to be here.
Thank you. And so where are you in the world?
I'm in Tucson, Arizona.
Oh, well, it's minus 25 Celsius here. So I think it's probably warmer there. People are always like, is that Fahrenheit or Celsius? And it's like, once it's minus 40, it's the same. So it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. So it's like 50 some odd Fahrenheit here right now. So I don't really remember the conversion. It's been a long time since I used it.
I don't know either. I just know the room temperature is like 25, which is about 70 something ish.
Yeah. Okay. So it's like 19, 20 degrees here right now.
Yeah. That's warm. That's like summer weather for us here in Calgary.
in the depths of January for us.
That's why all the Canadians go down there at this time of year.
Yeah, I know a few that they actually, I have a couple friend that they have a home in Alaska.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
They summer there and they winter here.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough, long, dark winter, but I like the snow, so it's okay. So thank you for joining me on my podcast or whatever. I should come up with a word, what I call it. It's my show. And I would love to know, Louis, do you consider yourself a creative person either now or as a kid? Like, is that something ever that's been on your radar?
I think if you ever asked, like, I would probably say no, like just in the traditional sense, right? So like traditional creativity, like I can't draw, I can't paint. I don't have like that vision of like walking into a room and let's decorate it this way. I can't do those things. I don't play an instrument. I can't sing.
I can't either.
I did do drama though. So like I was a good actor. And I was in a couple musicals and actually I would speak the lines. I picked the characters that like one was like a gangster and I was like, gangsters don't sing. And so I just spoke the lines and Anything Goes was the name of that play. So in the traditional sense, I would say no. But what I've found, and I think like now as I'm, approaching 40 this year, my creativity comes in my problem solving, and what I call lateral thinking, looking at things maybe differently than other people would. I loved riddles. And actually in Afghanistan, when we would be in our vehicles driving for a long time, it's not like the Humvee has an FM radio station, right? So, and this is 2005. Like we didn't even, in my second deployment, we had like a internal radio communication. Yeah. So one guy would actually take a headphone and attach it to the microphone and play his iPod on the internal mic. But my first deployment, we didn't have that. So you're driving 16 hours. And so we would do riddles. And so that kind of training the lateral thinking. And so if you ask me now today, like, are you creative? I would say, yeah, I have my version of creativity, but not necessarily like, don't expect me to come, do like the painting you have behind your head there. Like,
yeah, I bought that in Paris on the street. So it was apparently made by a Parisian art student, which sounds like a good story, but it could have come from China. I don't know. Do you remember any of the riddles? Can you share a riddle with us?
I think that okay. So the first one that comes to my mind because it had me stumped for like a day, and it was what has a mouth and doesn't eat, always runs and never walks, and has a bed and doesn't sleep.
Oh, first I was thinking like a bottle because you were drinking from the bottle, but then I don't think that's a bed. And runs it never sleeps is probably something like electronic, like a fridge or
Always
something.
runs and never walks, and has a bed and never sleeps. Yeah.
Has a bed and never sleeps. That's the one that's stumping me.
Yeah.
Has a mouth. Of course, I'm like, is that a roundworm? Like, I'm really bad. Like, I actually struggle with riddles. Do you want to tell us the answer? Because I
So
don't know.
it's a river.
Oh, yes. Okay. You know
And
what?
the guy gave me that while we were driving through a river.
Oh, that's so funny. And you still didn't get it.
Nope. we spent like 4 hours in this river because there's no roads in that area, so
Yeah.
you basically use these shallow rivers to
Yes.
traverse through. And so we're driving through this thing. He thought it was hilarious that I couldn't figure it out, and yeah. So that's why it's in my mind because like I remember being so angry when I finally got out of the truck and I stepped into this water, and I was like, "Oh my gosh!"
That's so funny. You know, the riddles remind me there's actually a creativity kind of test called random word associates.
Mm.
And there's a newer creativity test that's related to this as well. And that's where you give like three, it's very similar to a riddle. You give like three words, and then you have to come up with the word that connects them. So one would be like hot, catcher, and food. So what's one word that goes with those? If you want to.
Hot dog, a baseball field.
Well, it's dog, right? So it's hot dog, and then it has to be dog
Dog
catcher and
catcher.
dog food. So it has to be like one word that you can put with all
Oh,
three.
I see. I get what you're going. All right.
Right.
Yeah.
But what made me think about the riddle is that test has always been originally thought as for convergent thinking, which is where you choose one answer. But it actually helps with divergent thinking because you start to think like, is it baseball? Is it dog? Like what you go through, and then your divergent thinking, which is the brain that starts like making connections randomly come in. And then what usually happens is there's like a poof of an insight. Like you don't even know how you got the answer. It
Yeah.
just kind of pops. So with that riddle, it sounds like that, like the experiences of you jumping in the river is like made those connections and you had an insight,
Yeah.
which is really cool. So I never thought about that way with riddles. So
All right.
awesome. Okay. So it sounds to me that you have always been creative, but your definition of it changed.
Sure. But I think though, yeah, my personal one, right? When you talk to somebody like, oh, that's a creative person, there's like a traditional thought of what that means.
Mhm.
Um, and I never call it creative thinking.
Mm.
Um,
Why?
because I think it actually stifles creativity, right? So if I tell you to think about this problem laterally, it literally there's like a visual element
Mm.
of approaching this in a completely different direction.
Mhm.
And so it's almost like askew. Take whatever you think and look at this in a lateral way, right?
Mhm.
And it encourages. I think maybe it's just because the term's so used, right? So it means
Mm.
something to everybody, and it gives me
Mhm.
an opportunity to give them something they haven't thought of before. So like, if a CEO says we need a creative solution, everybody's going to roll their eyes,
Yeah.
right? Okay, because they like sure, but if he says, okay, I need some lateral solutions to this problem, it's a different. I can't explain it. I'm sure
Okay.
maybe somebody will listen to this and be like, I can tell you why that is. I don't know why. I just know that it is. So
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think a lot of times, like I've talked to some researchers that work, especially in the corporate world, and they call creativity thinking differently. I think for the same reason that you kind of mentioned at the beginning, that people often think creativity is something a little bit random or frivolous or not important or not, you can't execute on it effectively, like just a bunch of different reasons. But I like that idea of thinking laterally because when you say thinking creatively to most people, if they think, oh gosh, now I got to go like wear some hemp and, do some macrame and sing Kumbaya, right? Like, it's too vague. Like, it doesn't really tell them what you want. But I like that idea of saying thinking laterally, because people who are maybe a little bit more, logistic or logical in their thinking can think, oh, okay, well, I know what lateral thinking means. It means like stepping aside and thinking from a different angle. So I think that's really helpful. And it sounds like it's working really well for you anyway.
If it isn't, I wouldn't know, right? Like,
the honesty. I mean, that's part of being creative, is being honest and vulnerable, right? So,
yeah.
so I want to ask you a little bit about creativity in the military, because I lived in Jacksonville for a little while and knew a lot of guys in the Navy. And, while it's considered a very rigid and regimental type of field, I'd love to know how creativity is perceived, and whether that's relating to the words around it, like you just mentioned, like creativity is like an eye rolling thing, or whether there's creativity and they call it something else. So I'm just really curious about your experience there.
I will equate it a lot to prison. Okay.
Oh,
So
okay.
prisoners are very creative, and they find lateral solutions to the problems that they have. So, I mean, they make shivs out of toothbrushes and, like all of these. And then the prison food is like its own, it's amazing to hear some of these guys and talk about. So anyway, so it's a very regimented, very structured, like limited resource, and the creativity of the human mind. Now, that's not to say like, I'm not making it a great thing. I'm just saying, like, if you want to kind of find a parallel to what happens in the military in a lot of ways, is, you may have limited resources, you've got very strict boundaries, but you find ways to work within those boundaries, and to use the tools at your disposal, maybe in a different way than how they were intended, to make them more effective. Like one example, in Iraq, soldiers were hitting these really deadly improvised explosive device, IEDs. And these in particular, they're called EFPs. It's explosively formed projectile. And what it does, it creates like a SIBO round. So this bomb explodes and it sends a projectile that goes, it's so hot and moving so fast, it just pierces the armor of the vehicle without a problem, and creates a vacuum inside the vehicle, and this big fireball, and it would just destroy everybody. And they were using infrared detection to set it off. So if you walk into a home with a home alarm, you'll see the little guy in the corner, and it lights up when you walk in the room. That's an infrared sensor. So just the heat of your body, it's going to set it off.
Oh, I see. So the bomb had a sensor in it, and when you got close enough, that your heat would trigger it.
Right.
Okay.
Of the vehicle, the heat of the vehicle would trigger this bomb. Because what happened is, at first they were using like cell phones and radio signals, and we were jamming those. So it had a primary, was a cell phone, and then when they saw the convoy, they would arm it to the infrared. So even if you were jamming, it wouldn't matter. As soon as your truck came by, it would go off. And so this mechanic, and I should probably learn this kid's name, young mechanic, he figured out that he could run the coolant system from the engine over a hose, ran the hose out in front of the vehicle, and put a big box there, and had the hose go around in a circle and then go back into the vehicle. So you just basically extended the line of the coolant system of the engine. But what it did was it created a box that was hot out in front of the truck. So it would deadline the vehicle. Like, you couldn't drive anymore. It would go off and it would blow up this box where the truck wasn't there.
So it didn't change that the bomb was triggered, but it saved the lives of the people in the truck.
Right. And then that became standard practice, actually, all through Iraq. Anybody that has deployed, they're familiar with the Rhino. And the Rhino system was developed by a young mechanic. And I want to say he was like an E3 or E4 kid who just had an idea. And then later the military kind of developed it, and they changed the design and optimized it. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff. But that is kind of like this finding a new way of looking at this problem, and thinking of a unique solution that the enemy really, they never really figured out a way to defeat that.
Yeah. And sometimes the simpler solutions, even though it's not simple, having like changing the coolant system, or the most effective versus tech solutions. But I'm really curious, like in the military, because I would think, I'm trying to just like put myself in that situation, and with this young mechanic who's like, well, we could try this. How was it that it got from young mechanic, people probably didn't take him that seriously, to execution and it saving lives? Because I imagine military being so much more red tape than that pushing through. And was it the stakes were so high it was worth a shot? Or tell me how that process worked and what made that successful.
Okay.
If you
So,
know.
well, I don't know specifically about this story, but I will tell you we break the rules a lot.
Okay.
Do you ever follow like malicious compliance on Reddit? Ever heard any
No.
of these stories where they follow the letter but not the spirit of the law? Is basically what people do, right?
Gotcha.
Okay, so if you, for somebody that knows, they'll get it. But here's an example of just like my own personal how. The short answer to this is it's a leadership thing, right? So the lower level leader deciding they're going to take a risk. So
Gotcha.
somebody at some level of leadership had knowledge and said, let's do it. And they took a risk because if they got caught, they could get in trouble, but it was worth it, right? So
So
that's,
they didn't ask for permission. They just kind of said, I'm going to do this and hope it
yeah,
works out.
yeah, for sure. 100%. And then after it worked, then they told people, and then a smart commander said, yeah, let's do it. And then they did it across the board. So I was along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border, and there was a large enemy force on the other side of the border, and we were trying to get air support. Couldn't get air support. They wouldn't let me fire any artillery across the border. So they said, "Oh, you can fire a mortar, but only an illumination round, which is it's like a big flare."
Okay.
So that was the only thing I was allowed to do. So it's like, and you set it when you call that in, you have to tell them, hey, here's the terrain elevation, so it blows up above, and then it just lights up the sky.
Gotcha.
And I called it in, and the mortar sergeant called back and said, you need to check your elevation. And I told him, no, the elevation's right, like that fast, back and forth. And there was a long pause on his end, and then he figured out what I was doing. Is that they wouldn't let me fire artillery. So I set the elevation below the target. So I fired a 60 millimeter or 120 millimeter cannonball at the enemy.
Wow.
That then exploded, and it set off this flare that lit the woods on fire, and they ran away. So
wow.
I mean, I followed the rules that I was given, but that is a creative solution with the tools at hand.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. Like I can't even just fathom being in that kind of situation. And, there's so many people that are easy to judge or say, well, you didn't, whatever the case, but I can't even imagine being in a situation where I think I might get blown up any second, or, I'm dealing with a life and death situation. And I guess the constraints at that point help with creativity because you have to get the job done, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. So, and thank you for your service. I actually do stand-up comedy, and I hope this isn't offensive to veterans, because I know in the US there's a thing about vets, right? So I'm a veterinarian, but people when I first moved I didn't know anything. I'm from Canada. Like I know nothing about the military. When I met these guys that I met with in Florida who were from the Navy, they said, we're pilots in the Navy. I was like, isn't Navy just boats? Like, why are you flying? Anyway, it turned into this whole thing about, what's that?
You never saw Top Gun?
Okay, so I'm going to tell you the story. So we're sitting, it's a long story, but I'm chatting with these guys. I know nothing about the military, and they're at a friend's house. And they said, well, we fly. I said, well, like, what do you fly for the Navy? And they said, well, we fly jets. And I said, what, like a jumbo jet? And they're like, and now I've lived in Florida. I know that as soon as someone says I'm a jet pilot, you know what that means, but I had no idea. And I was like, they're like, we don't carry any, we go faster. I'm like, what, like the Concorde? Like, why would you be flying? And then they're like, we don't carry people. Right? They're at this point, at first they're all like, oh yeah, we're like, we fly jets. And then by the end, they're like, who is this person? Because I was like, well, why do you have to fly cargo so fast, like to the boat? I don't know why it's so urgent. And they finally had to say, these like, Top Gun pilots were like, have you ever seen the movie Top Gun? I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. And they were just like, who is this woman? Anyway, so that's took them down a peg or two, which they needed.
Yeah.
But yeah, so my military knowledge, also another, military faux pas was when I was in Canada, and I had met a guy that I went to university with. I hadn't seen him for a few years, and I met him at a bar, and I was like, "Oh, what are you doing?" And his friend walks up and he kind of hugs him. And he's like, "He got drafted." I'm like, "You did?" And he said, "Yeah." I'm like, "And you're happy about this? I didn't think they could do that
Sports.
anymore." He got drafted to like the Argos, which is the football team. I'm like, such an idiot. Anyway, so that's my military background. But and I totally forgot what I was going with that to tell you the story. But anyway, the point is that I am a military idiot, and thank you for sharing your experience. Okay, so let's change gears a little bit and talk about your current job. What you're doing is helping companies find cost reductions. So it sounds like you connect with the business owner or leader, and they might have like costs related to the running of their company, and then you go in and say, "Don't pay me. If I make you some money, then you give me some money." So tell me a little bit about how that works, and I'm assuming there's a lot of creativity in there.
Sure. So the creativity, I think, results in knowing where to look. And a lot of my job is just that, right? So there's like the story of the guy who, uh, it's one of those like funny things, and is like they call the plumber, and he came in and he like turned a wrench or something, was there for 5 minutes and charged him like $500.
Yeah.
And they're like, "How is that $500?" And he's like, "I want an itemized bill," and it was like $5 turning wrench, $495 knowing where to turn the wrench, right? You know, and that's a lot of what we do is like we know where to look, and being able to walk. And now I can't unsee a lot of this stuff. So, and I'm able to make a lot of recommendations, often outside of the scope of what we specifically do as a business. So we have folks that are trained to look at invoices in particular categories, and telecom and waste and internet and merchant service, your credit card bills, all this kind of stuff. But being able to recognize some of the other pumps. Okay, so for an example, I go to a school and they have a dumpster, and the dumpster has a side door on it. Okay. And so I look at the dumpster and I say, "Hey, why do you have a side door in the dumpster?" He said, "Well, we have an older employee. She takes out the trash. We don't want to have to lift the trash bag over her head." I said, "Okay, but what happens when the trash gets to this level right here where the door was?" And there was like this pause, right? I said, "Okay, I'll answer it for you. You've got two options. One is you shut the door and you pick the trash up over your head, which defeats the purpose of having the door. Or two, it gets picked up when it's half full."
Yeah.
You know what they charge you? They charge you for the full cubic space of the entire dumpster. So the side door on the dumpster, you're paying extra to have that door.
Yeah.
That doesn't solve your problem anyway. Like it's on every end of that. It was a poor decision to pay extra for a dumpster with a side door on it because you're so that kind of thing is like knowing. It's pretty simple, but it's knowing where to look and being able to identify like, that doesn't, why are you doing that? Right. And I also, by the way, that question, like asking it in a very soft way to give yourself room. That's 20 years of leadership experience. I'll go ahead and share that one fairly with everyone. If you have direct reports, to nicely ask, "Can you explain to me what's going on? Like, what is the thought process here? Help me understand your decision making," because they may have a really good reason. And that's a lot better than you being like, "That's dumb."
Yeah. And making those assumptions before you ask their point of view, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of that is being able to identify those things. I was walking through a manufacturing facility, and as I was going through it, I've spent some years in manufacturing in factories working with John Deere. And at one point I asked him if he had ever had somebody come and do sort of a lean operation on their facility, lean manufacturing, because he kind of like didn't quite understand why I was asking. I said, "Well, you've got almost a third of your factory space just based on me walking around. Like I didn't pull out a ruler, but a third of your factory space is just parts on the walls." And that to me seems like you're paying a lot of there's a lot of money associated with factory space that isn't being able to be used. in a productive fashion, and it's
Mm-hmm.
just being used to warehouse parts.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and now that problem, that requires a lot of creative thinking and solutions, like what are our turns, our inventory turns, how hard is it to get this particular piece, what happens when we don't have that piece, right? And fully understanding like how much inventory do we really need at all times of each particular part, and you've got to look
Mm-hmm.
at it on a part by part basis to make that decision.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes it's, do we need to keep this product line?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's a make versus buy decision, and we say, hey, we make this product, we do one a year, and we got to store all these parts and blah, blah, blah. What if we pay somebody else to do that and we just buy
Yeah.
it from them and then resell it, right? So, but it's being able to recognize that, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
that guy, he owns that place, he walks through it every day. This isn't a decision that he made when he started. It wasn't like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to save a third of my space of my factory for parts storage. It was, I need a place to put this, and I need to, oh, we ran out of this. Well,
Mm-hmm.
buy 10, because
Yes.
I made that emotional decision. Like, I have 100 employees standing around because we didn't have that dang part, and they can't get it for another week, and I
Yeah.
got to shut down, get
I don't
100
want
of
to be
them.
stuck again in this situation. So
Exactly.
yeah.
And then you say, okay, well, how much does it cost you to store 100 of these, and how much did it cost you to be down for a week? And like, let's
Yeah.
do this like
Yeah.
kind of math solution type thing. So yeah, so that's sort of like the creativity of how it
Yeah.
comes to play, and having that fresh eyes, is
Yes.
I don't have that emotional attachment to
Mm-hmm.
whatever. I don't know the backstory behind the decision. I can just look at the problem as it is today, and
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Yeah, and you know what I love about that story is I think a lot of people think, we talk about creativity and people immediately think of kindergartners that send unicorns to the moon, right? And there is part of that, like part of seeing something in a different way that no one's thought of before because it's just their everyday normal. But what you're talking about is incorporating the other very important part of creativity, which is the convergent thinking and like the selection. And you can't do that if you don't have the experience. Like from a neuroscience aspect, there's three main areas of creativity. There's the executive function, there's salience, and divergent thinking. And the divergent is the kindergartner, right? But the executive function is knowing like about parts and knowing how often you need to use them and looking at the inventory turns and all that stuff. Like that's executive function. And then your salience network just kind of toggles between them. So I
Hmm.
think what I love about what you're saying is this focus on the executive function aspect of creativity, which people don't think of as creativity. They think of it as like expertise or logic, but it's all part of creativity, is putting these things together and saying like, what do I know about this? I use the example of a sculptor. Like I can't sculpt something. I might have a great vision, have what I want this piece of marble to look like, but I don't know how hard to turn the wrench or hit the chisel. So what you've talked about there is like this is integration of all these things that are important.
You made it sound way cooler than maybe I ever could.
Sure, let's go with that. Okay, so I always go over on time, so I hope that's okay. I didn't ask if you had a little bit
Yeah, that's
extra
fine.
time.
Mhm.
So I want a few more questions before we get to your dare, which I'm not going to forget. I'm not surprised you picked the dare on the truth or dare.
Uh,
Tell me a little bit about your three kids and how that has impacted your creativity at home, or if it has.
mm, so my kids are awesome. They're 12. Well, they're 12, 8, and 12, 9, and 7. The problem is that like we just had a birthday
Yep.
2 days ago, and
Oh,
we've got another birthday in February and
yeah.
another one in April. So after April, there'll be 12, 10, and
Yeah.
8. And so it's
Yes.
easy, but we're in between all of these numbers. So yeah, so three little ones, my girl's in the middle. And she's the most traditionally creative of the bunch.
Okay.
She loves to draw and to sing, and she's been, dress up and play. And she was also the hardest to punish because you put her in timeout and she talks to herself and, creates a story and like forgets that she's in timeout. Um, and it's like,
Well,
that was an
maybe that ends up being a good thing in the end.
yeah. My youngest, he's very athletic, enjoys the sports and moving with his body. Um, and if we're gonna say like where the creativity kind of presents itself, I see it in his strategic thinking in sports, which is,
Mhm.
I'm not a big sports guy. My sports are like jujitsu, right? Like that's the closest I'll get to. I'm not good with the balls.
Mhm.
And he really is actually one of those stars in his soccer team. And
Oh.
um, he was on defense and was scoring goals because he figured out that when the goalie came out, he could kick the ball and it would go over the kid's head. But just have like this strategic mindset in how to approach the field and giving his other players directions and being able to see that, which is interesting because I don't see it the way even my 7-year-old spots things.
Yeah.
Um, and then
Wow.
and then my oldest is the one that probably takes the most in his approach as I do.
Mhm.
And he likes the Rubik's cubes and the puzzle
Mhm.
games, and we got him those little metal puzzle.
Oh, yes. Yep. Mhm.
He got one of those. It was like an advent calendar one year,
Oh.
and he was like 9 and
Yeah.
was like solving all of them every day
Wow.
as he got them. So he kind of has like that ability um, and he loves the riddles as well, and
Mhm.
finding creative solutions to problems, which also means that he creates creative problems. So you say, how does that affect me as a parent? It means that I have to think creatively about like what are the problems that like it's gotten closer now that I at least now have enough experience as a father that I can identify. I asked him something the other day, like, are you using this? And he goes, yes. And I said, are you using it? He goes, no. Like
Yeah. The loopholes. I'm assuming if he's that much of a logical
oh my
thinker, he's very
gosh,
good at creating loopholes. I'm not
absolutely.
using it now, but I'm using it in space-time continuum.
Exactly. Yes, I have
I have
used
one of
it.
those.
Yeah.
Oh, kids,
Depends
they
on the
keep us on our
definition of
toes.
the word is, right? Like that's
Yes, yes, I get that.
mm,
Awesome. Well, that sounds like you got 3 wonderful kids that keep you on your toes, and, I really appreciate you sharing, about your experience with the military and your cost reduction. I've got your website up here, so if anybody's looking to connect with you. Also, if you're watching this on LinkedIn, Louis is, or Luis, depending on which language you speak, is, connected as a speaker. And then also you can find Louis's book on leadership, and obviously has a great, breadth of experience in leadership in the military, which is one of the things I've seen people in the military say that that really helps them with leadership. So I've got your book here, and it was a pleasure, but I'm not going to let you go without the truth or dare section. So you, in the spirit of your taking risk personality, selected a dare, which means I'm going to tell you to do something on camera. So I asked you before we went live if you had a pencil. And I always try to creatively make these up as I go, and which is a bit of a challenge. I would like to see you try to roll your pencil from the top of your head down to your nose and grab it. Do you know what I mean?
like
Like
what do you
try
mean?
to
Like,
roll it and then grab it
oh, without touching it?
without touching it. Yes. Be
Without
more
my
specific.
hands?
Yeah, without your hands. Let's see
Oh,
if
I
you
don't
can do
know.
that. I don't know how this is going to go because I didn't even try it myself. It might be impossible.
I don't know. uh,
I love it.
no, my nose is too big.
I don't
I
think
can
it's
feel it.
possible. Now I've got
I
to try
feel
it.
like it gets too much of a speed bump there at the yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it's your nose. I don't think it's actually possible.
I mean, I
So
know
get your son. This is a good thing for your son
I
to
could
try.
hold it if I just put it there. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Gotcha.
if I may just say one thing real quick about that book, I know
Yes.
like a lot of people, like I've been in leadership 20 years. I know a lot about leadership books, and usually they're boring reads. And this one may be boring too. But let me just say one thing about it is that I wanted to create something that if you lead a team, if you have, I had leaders underneath me. So I was a leader of leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried to do book studies, and they would, here's the things, this is the behaviors of people. They'll read when they get the meeting notice that we're going to have a discussion about it. Then they open up the book. Okay. So I created chapters that you can read in like 15 minutes.
Oh.
And it has like a cool story, like the one about the blowing up the thing. So
Yeah.
it's like cool stories like that. And then at the end, it has an action, which is like, hey, this is how you put the lesson into action. And so you can
Mm-hmm.
work on it over the week. So if you don't want to send somebody to a leadership training course where they're gone for 3 to 5 days and they get all of these things about how conversations are supposed to go, but they never actually go that way. And then you get back to your desk and you've got 700 emails and you can't actually implement anything because you're just trying to catch up, and you trying to catch up. So you're getting real stressed and you go back into all the bad behaviors that you had before the class.
And you never do any of the stuff you learned because
yeah. So if you want to avoid that, this is a $12 option solution for that as well. So
well, I'm going to go pick up that book. And I remember reading that when I was preparing for the show. And I'm glad you brought that up because I resonated with that so much, because when I wrote my book, which sponsors this show, which was something I heard on a YouTube or like a podcast, like sponsor your own show with your own book. I'm like, brilliant. But my book just came out, and that is what's one of the things that prompted me to write a book. I was like, how many creativity books have I read that are so incredibly boring that I can barely get through them? And I am like passionate about this topic. Yeah. So I am going to buy your book because there's nothing I hate more than a boring, long drawn out book that, you know, doesn't give you much. They just have to pad the book, or it's boring. And those stories, like, how are you supposed to remember any of that stuff? I can't. So,
yeah. Yeah. And they, you know, it's a lot of leadership stuff. They try to pretend as though people are objective and that you can put them in these little boxes. And if you follow this conversation flow map, that this is how it's going to go. People aren't that. That's not what people are. You know,
it's theoretical. Without
my lifetime, I probably supervised 1,000 different direct reports, and I can tell you, yeah, there was 1,000 different ways of dealing with each one of them, right? So
it's almost like you try to shove this method into a book that really can't. There's no way you can encapsulate all of that probably in a book, because you need that experience and the knowledge to kind of incorporate those together. So yeah, we could talk for hours on this, but thank you very much for joining me, Louis. And you can find Louis on his website. No risk. It sounds like he'll just come and do it for free, and he only charges you if you make him money. That to me is a no losing proposition. So can you come and do that at my house?
No, but I could give you tips if you ask for them. So.
Thank you so much for joining me. It was a pleasure, and I can't wait to read your book, and so glad we connected.
Thank you. Me too.